Hello everyone, welcome to the webinar. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the people who are joining across the world. So this is Varun Nagaraj. I'm going to be your host and moderator for today's session. So today the webinar topic which we will be discussing is on simplify and accelerate your IT compliance by leveraging a common controls framework. So this webinar is with association with UCF. So yeah, so before we get started, I would like to kind of inform you about some housekeeping items which we want you to need to be considered. So attendees, if you have any trouble viewing the presentation or listening to the audio, request you to please rejoin or redial to the GoToWebinar. If you have any question throughout the broadcast, there is a chat icon available on your bottom of your screen. Please post your questions on the chat box. Questions can be submitted through the presentation. Throughout the presentation, the answers to those questions will be addressed during the Q&A sessions following the presentation, which we have kept dedicatedly like about 10 minutes for you guys to have any Q&A session in the end. So we will try to answer as many as questions before the hour concludes. However, if we couldn't take up during the live session, we would be addressing those questions offline. You can send those questions to webinar@MetricStream.com. So this webinar is recorded and a copy of this material would be shared to you within 48 hours after the webinar, and also it will be available as on demand on our website. So you can just log into our website and you can download or view the recorded session. So yeah, so before we kickstart, I think I would like to welcome our two esteemed speakers for today's session, Mr. Jason Mefford and NS Rao. So Jason, would you introduce yourself for the audience, please?
Yeah, so I've been involved in the GRC space for a long time. Was actually formerly Chief Risk Officer, Head of Information Security, Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer, and also have run and been the Chief Audit Executive at several different organizations as well. So very, very familiar with this area. Now I kind of, help people figure out how to do it. And how to do it in a much easier way, because I know how hard it is being a compliance officer, and some of the things we're going to talk about today are going to make your life so much easier, which is why I'm sharing, why I'm here, why I'm working with Unified Compliance now.
Okay, thank you very much, Jason. Wonderful introduction. Thank you. So we have NS Rao, Group Vice President, Customer Success and Services from MetricStream. So NS, would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Hope all of you are staying safe during this pandemic time. The good times are coming up here. I think in US things are opening up, and I hope the rest of the world is also catching up on that. So I'm the Group Vice President at MetricStream. My day job is to actually help the customers realize the benefits out of their GRC program and also make risk-informed decisions by using MetricStream products and tools. Over the last several years, there is the landscape for the IT and cybersecurity has changed. And I look forward actually for this panel discussion to go over and share my perspectives the last 20 years that I've been interacting with the customers in terms of the GRC implementations. So I'm looking forward for this discussion.
Okay, so thank you, Enes, for that introduction. So yeah, so going ahead, I think in today's session, we will be covering a lot of things. So in out of those, a few of the talking points which we would be covering in today's session is on your screen right now. So some of the talking points would be to how you can eliminate duplicates effort by asserting compliance across multiple authority documents simultaneously, and also you can understand simplify your regulations requirement by clarifying conflicts created by multiple overlapping documents. So, and also you will learn about how to save time by creating a single point of control over hundreds of complex regulations, requirements, and guidelines, and etc. And also we would touch base upon how you can limit your legal liability by drilling down for explanations and sources of each common control. And also in the end, like we will read on something about how we can leverage UCF and MetricStream, a case study from one of our Fortune 500 organization. I think we can read about that. So yeah, so I think without further ado, I think we will just take right through the session. So just before, I think we hand over the floor to Jason. I know you guys are waiting to hear his presentation. I have a poll question for you all. I would request you to take that poll question, which will come up in your screen right now. So you have like about 30 seconds to answer. I would request you to kind of give the answers whichever you feel you are facing some challenges or anything in your organization. So, yep. All right. Thank you for that response. I think we got like about 81% people voted for that poll question. So thank you very much for that. And yeah, so I think without any further ado, I would hand over the floor to Jason. So Jason, the floor is all yours.
All right, well, here we go, everybody. Ready? Buckle in. We're gonna have some fun. I know, talking about compliance, how can you have fun when you're talking about compliance? But we're gonna have some fun talking about compliance today. So first off, I wanna go through and just share with you some of the simplified steps to compliance, because this is going to help you kind of understand and hopefully have the light bulb go off in your head and you're like, ah, now I get what he's talking about being able to save a lot of time. You know, because really, if there's only one thing that you have to comply with, that's pretty simple, right? But unfortunately, I'm guessing if you're like most people, you don't have one thing you have to comply with. You have 20 or 50 or 100 different things that you have to comply with. And we're going to go through it and talk about how you can make that much, much easier for yourself. Now, usually what ends up happening, somebody comes to you and says, hey, we've got to comply with this particular mandate. And so you have to figure out what it's going to take for you to be able to comply with that mandate, right? Now, the thing is, they don't just come to you once. These things just keep coming to you over and over again. Hey, there's this new XYZ thing that we got to comply with. You go figure out how to make it work. So let's talk about what those steps are. So the first thing is you have to understand which of these, and I'm just going to share quickly some words, what they mean, that you're going to hear me talk about today. So you got to figure out which authority documents you have to follow. And so we'll talk about that later, but think about those as laws, mandates, best practices, things like ISO standards, other stuff like that. So first off, you have to figure out what ones do I need to follow. You've got to read them and you've got to understand the citations that are in them and see what they're actually asking you to do. And just a minute, for some reason, I went backwards on it, went forward in my slide. There we go. You have to interpret the mandates, figure out what it is that they're actually asking you to do, because most of the time it's in a language that is not a control. It's just asking you to do something and you have to figure out what it's actually asking you to do. So that's what we would call mapping or doing it to a control. You've also got to figure out, because again, right, you're not just dealing with one thing, you're dealing with lots of things. And so now you have to start going through the process of trying to crosswalk and figure out, do I have duplication? Well, in this document, it's asking me to do this. It kind of sounds like what this other document over here is asking me to do. Are they really the same or not? So you've got to go through that whole effort as well. Then you've got to actually document what you're actually doing to comply with it. Right, and again, you can do that on, a lot of people use spreadsheets, or you can use the GRC tool like MetricStream, which is much, much easier, right? And then at the end of the day, you have to conduct some sort of audit to prove that you've actually done what it is that you're supposed to have done, right? So what are some of the things that people struggle with? And, at the beginning, that first poll question, were some of those pain points that you're looking at. But here's a few things that, again, a lot of times people don't think about that I want to bring up with you, right? How do you track them, right? How do you interpret those citations? Because again, most of the time it's written by lawyers, and so you have to convert that into plain English, something that people can actually do, some control that's repeatable. You have to build out this defensible methodology. So how can you prove that what you are doing actually fulfills the requirement? And also, being able to understand and crosswalk across the documents. So again, sometimes people will say, well, I got a list from somebody and they told me that these were the things I'm supposed to do. Well, the regulator doesn't care if they gave you a list. They want to know that you're complying with their particular document. So do you have the evidence, and can you link what you're doing back to those particular authority documents? And in most instances, people can't do that. And that is actually one of the things you have to do in compliance. And the last thing is, well, how do you create something that's easy to use and scalable? And I'm gonna show you something today that is very easy to use and is also very scalable. Because again, as I told you, if you only have to do one thing, probably not that big of a deal, but you're probably not just doing one thing. There's 5, there's 10, there's 20, there's 100 of these different things that you have to follow. So how can you make it easier on yourself? So to begin with, there's really kind of 2 options that you have. You can do it yourself, which means, there's lots of TV shows about that. I'm going to go out and build a deck in my back. I'm going to do it myself, right? And that would be like building a new car from scratch, like this DeLorean from Back to the Future. You can do it, right? If that's what you want to do, if you have very specific things that you want to do, you think you're different than everybody else, then go build your own DeLorean. Now, or the equivalent of that, okay? Now, what I'm going to tell you is that's a very expensive and time-consuming process. In fact, that $1 to $2 million to build your own DeLorean, a lot of organizations, you might spend $1 to $2 million to try to build this stuff yourself. So you have that choice. Or what I'm going to show you today is you can do something off the rack. So if you look at it and you say, you know what, I don't need a DeLorean that takes me back in time. I just need a vehicle that's going to help me comply with these different things, right? And if that's the case, then you can choose something that's like an off the rack, like a Toyota RAV4 car that my wife has. Now, much, much cheaper. And in fact, what I'm going to show you today is much, much less than even buying a new car. Okay, so it's something that everybody can do. So what does this look like? So as I told you to begin with, authority documents can be a lot of these different things, laws and regulations, okay? Some of those things that you're contracted to, you have an obligation from a contract, but it can even go up into things like international standards, audit guidelines, best practices as well. So in compliance, there are things that are mandatory, right? Mandatory means that you actually have to comply with it versus a voluntary thing like an ISO standard. Your organization is actually choosing to follow that or to comply with that particular thing. Now, one of the things that we find is as you're looking at all of these different mandates and different documents, they don't use the same term all the time. So one document might say shut the faucet, another one says close the spigot, and another one says turn off the nozzle. So you have to decide, are those 3 things actually the same thing? If you look at it, you might think it is, but again, this is that legally defensible position. Are those really the same? So maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but can you actually prove it? And we're going to talk about how you can go through and actually prove it. Well, the one thing is, if you just want to do an off-the-shelf kind of thing, then you can just leverage what UCF has already done. They've already gone through this process, or you can build your own, right? And again, building your own is going to mean that there's a lot of stuff you're going to have to do. You're going to have to prove it. You're going to have to build some of this stuff out on your own. What does that look like? Well, as an example, right, there you have to build what's called a noun translator. You have to look at some of these different terms that are being used in these documents and come up with some sort of harmonized term. So in this instance, on the left, there's 3 different options. And so you would have to figure out, are those all the same thing? And if they are, what term are we actually going to use? In this instance, we're going to use personal data request is the term, the harmonized term, to mean all of those things. So you got to do that for the nouns. You also got to do it for the verbs that are in those particular documents, right? You have to look at those citations. You have to figure out what does that term actually mean? What term are we going to use? So again, you can go through, you can build this out, you can figure it out yourself, or you can just rely on something that's already been done and has been proven and used by companies for about 20 years, okay? You also have to provide a common control. And so now you're seeing where some of these terms are starting to come together. So a common control is something that effectively goes from the mapping of those citations to something that now you can do something about. So provide access to personal records when a personal data request is received. Boom, now I've got something I can do. It's a control. Now I can decide the how and what, excuse me, that I'm going to do to be able to comply with that. So what's a UCF common control? Well, what we just talked about, like turning off the faucet, shutting the tap, shutting off the water valve, closing the spigot, UCF has already gone through, figured out that those things in fact do mean the same thing, and so they create a common control like shut off the faucet. So every time you see turn off the faucet, you know that means shut the faucet. But not everything is going to map back to that particular common control. For example, swing the tennis racket, that has nothing to do with these other things, and so that would not be mapped to shut the faucet common control. It would be mapped to something else, right? So you also have to crosswalk. Now, what does that mean? Well, I told you before, here's examples of 4 different authority documents, some citations from those documents. And from that, you have to figure out, well, are these actually asking me to do the same things? Do I need to do 4 things, or are all of these things similar and I can do 1? Well, you have to go through, and again, if you're building this on your own, if you're creating a DeLorean, you have to figure this out. Or you can take a common controls approach and say, you know what? Each of those citations have already been mapped back to this common control, which means I don't have 4 things to do, I just have 1 thing to do. And I'll tell you, being a compliance officer, I'd much rather only have 1 thing to do instead of 4 things to do, because I'm guessing that all of you are already overworked, right? So if I can go from instead of doing 4 things to 1 thing, that's much better for me, right? So again, there's different ways that you can do this. What I'm going to show you today in what UCF has built and made available is an off-the-rack option like a Toyota RAV4. So if that's something that is of interest to you, let me show you how easy that can be. And then at the end, we'll show you how easy it can be to pull it over into a GRC tool as well, okay? So what's a unified compliance framework? Well, it's an enormous library of all of these different authority documents. In fact, there's about 1,000 authority documents that most organizations around the world have to follow. So think of the big ones: NIST 853, ISO 27000, you know, particular laws or privacy things like GDPR or California Privacy Act. All of those kind of things are included in the library of authority documents. There's between 10 and 15,000 common controls that all of those citations have been mapped back to, and everything is all linked together in a SaaS portal that you can access. You can customize it. You can go in and say, I don't need to follow everything, but here's the 5 that I want to follow. And you can go check, 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 and very quickly get a consolidated, customized, and deduplicated list of the controls that you would need to follow in order to comply with those documents, okay? So, but there's also modularity in it, because what you will find sometimes is a control might say, you know what, you need to have a policy on XYZ. And you might look at it and say, I don't have a policy on XYZ. Well, don't worry, because it's all based on framework. You see that there's a document there, or a thing called C documents there, right? That a lot of those other templates or other things that you would need in order to comply with that control are also in there. So again, there's almost 1,000 of these documents, and you customize it for your needs. If you remember when I told you at the beginning, it's not just about getting a list from somebody that says, oh, just trust me. If you do these things, you're going to be compliant, right? There's a lot of people out there that'll do that. They'll say, look, we've already looked at everything and here's your list. No, you need to do compliance based on what's right for your organization. So with UCF, you're able to go in and customize it specifically for your needs, okay? Because there's certain documents you don't need to comply with. So you don't need to worry about having those included in your list of controls, okay? And again, I mean, this is something that's been going on now for about 20 years. There's a whole bunch of patents behind this on how to do it. And in fact, it's the only framework that helps you, pull everything together. Remember, I told you at the beginning that legally defensible, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. You can see exactly why you're doing these different things and where those tie back to in your authority documents that you have to follow. So that way, if anybody ever comes in and says, are you following paragraph 1.2.3a? You can look up and go 1.2.3a, I'm using this control to do that. Yes, I'm doing it, and here is exactly how I'm doing it, okay? So how does that actually work? Well, these citations end up getting mapped back to these common controls. So again, here's an example from NIST 800-171. Different words are being used, right, very closely together within the document, but even though they're using different words, they're asking you to do the same thing. So both of those things have been mapped to the same control. So you will find there's duplication, right, within the documents. There's also duplication as you start to layer these documents on top of each other, because a lot of the documents are asking you to do some of the same things. So again, you can choose to do all of them, or you can choose to get a consolidated list. And again, maybe go from 4 down to 1. And I'll show you some numbers here in just a minute to kind of share with you on that. So again, each of these things, each of the authority documents are tagged, they're mapped, and they're put into the Common Control Hub that you can actually access and use. The framework is also loaded into it as well, right? To where, again, you have access to all of this different information. So it gives you, again, like I said, about 1,000 documents. And as new ones come out, like, if you're a NIST shop, you're probably complying with Rev 4 now, and you're thinking, oh, I got to prepare for Rev 5. Rev 5 is already in there, right? So you can see exactly what those are, and you can start doing your work on it. And again, it's customized lists to what you need to follow, not necessarily what somebody else is telling you that you need to follow. So you might be sitting there and going, okay, well, it sounds great, but how easy is it to use, and would this approach actually save me time and money, right? Great question. So how about if I share with you an example? So what I did was I just took 3 different documents, okay, ISO 27001, COBIT, and NIST 853. And within the tool, I told you, remember, if these are the only 3 things that are applicable to me, I'm going to check them, and I want to get a list of a consolidated list that's customized to me with everything deduplicated already. And we can see, from that I already do have information very quickly. In just a couple of seconds, literally by clicking it, I start to get an understanding of what I have to do to comply. And in fact, you can see the mandates and the citations, 2353. Those three documents are asking you to do 2,353 different things. Without going through a process like this, you would be left to believe there's 2,350 controls I have to put into my organization. But again, going through this, leveraging the framework, leveraging the work that has already been done, you find out, no, there's really only 1,195 things that I need to do. Still a lot, I understand that, but it's about half of what you normally would have done if you had tried to comply with these documents individually, okay? And so in fact, there's easy ways. Again, I create that in the tool, but now what do I do with it? Well, you can actually export it or use an API to pull it over into MetricStream, right? And in fact, here's just a little snapshot of that particular document. So you can see those three documents that I selected at the top as columns, and you actually see the citation reference, the paragraph reference that has been mapped back to that particular UCF control that is on the left. Okay, so now I have a list of everything I need to do that's also linked back to those particular documents, and I can see exactly within those documents why I am being asked to do that, okay? And in fact, here's another screenshot that shows you if we select, you know, control number 00004, control access rights to organizational assets, well, I'm actually being asked to do that by all three of those documents. And so again, very quickly, you can see where there is the duplication and overlap as well, okay? So again, I just want to throw up some numbers here for you as well, you know, just to help you see that, look, if you utilize an off-the-shelf option like this, 49% is deduplicated, right? Which means that you're only doing half of the amount of work that you normally would have to do. And in fact, you know, if you consider just the time to map, and what that means is how much time is it going to take me to read that authority document and try to figure out what it is that I need to do. And it's a significant amount of time for you to be able to do that, right? In fact, just to do that initial mapping would take someone almost 800 hours. Using the UCF tool, you don't have to spend the 800 hours. You literally click, 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 and here you go. So you save twice the effort by being able to do that. And that doesn't even count some of the crosswalking and deduplication time savings that you're saving as well, okay? So, and again, as I told you, easy to use SaaS tool that then you can either export your requirements out into a spreadsheet, or you can actually move that content, because the content from UCF then would move over into MetricStream through an API. So again, a lot of cost savings there, because there's no need for you to copy paste or try to manually upload. Everything can actually come over via API. So that's kind of my part of it. Now the important stuff is, you know, MetricStream now actually showing you how you can make some of these mandates actionable, and going through that information that is next. So.
Fantastic, Jason. Thanks for that session.
Yeah, so thank you, Jason, for that wonderful session. So I hope the audience are enjoying the session, and I believe that you guys are having a insightful session for that. So thank you very much again, Jason. So quickly, before we move on to MetricStream presentation from NS, so I would want you guys to quickly take one more poll question, if you don't mind, please. So it'll appear on your screen right now. Yep, so you have like about 30 seconds to answer. So just let us know whichever option is relevant for you. So, okay, all right. Thank you for answering those. Okay, wonderful. So let's get started with NS Rao session. So just give me a moment. I'll just put up the slides for you guys.
So what we have learned is like in terms of the UCF and its offering and how it actually just helped to unify the controls and then share those controls across citations and mandates and overall theme. Now we are actually going to look into like how MetricStream is actually as a GRC tool will help further to accelerate the journey of like IT compliance journey or any other audit journey or so on. So to start with, MetricStream integrated risk platform is a simple purpose-built and intelligent by design platform, and with all these components that are actually showing up there. So the first one being the federated data model. And so Jason talked about the several aspects around like you do the control test at one place, you map the control at one place, and then get benefited with across citations, across regulations, and so on. The federated data model is the source, is how actually you do it, that entire aspect, and we will spend more time around that. And the multi-dimensional org structure, this will actually just help to basically manage your the entities and the departments across the globe, and able to have roll-up reporting and slice and dice of the data by your location, by the entity and the legal entity, and so on. So that's what the multi-dimensional org structure, which is very powerful when it comes to your reporting as well as slice and dice of the data. And the third, the pillar in the risk integrated platform is the AI/ML capability. So the world is moving towards it, and you all are quite familiar with that. But how we are using this within the platform in the context of GRC, it is to actually the policy citations, or it is to find out the related issues based on the commonality in the issue titles or the descriptions and so on. And likewise, finding the frontline use cases like observations that are being logged and so on. So there are several use cases that are being incorporated to make the GRC professionals' life easy using AI/ML technology. And those are few things that I called out. Then the fourth pillar is about APIs and connectors. So the APIs, the world is actually, it's not about one tool, having a one GRC tool. The risks or the mitigation plans can come from any source. The risk could be actually at the visitor desk where the visitor information is being entered. So the risk could be on the 1-800 number, the call center number, that where someone actually logged, a customer or of the company logged a complaint about it. So that's where the risk could be stemming from. So having these integrations is an important aspect of it, and that's the other pillar that what we have as part of the platform. And the front line or the first line engagement is another integral part of it, and more the companies and the industry is actually moving towards enabling the front line so that a lot of these risks can be actually worked out or elevated further at the front and center of the frontline as frontline portion of it. And the configurability is the other pillar, which is number 6. So the GRC needs are evolving, and while there is commonality across IT compliance, IT risk, and audit, and so on, but there is also a specificity that each of the organizations have, and that's where the configurability of the tool is an extremely important aspect to tailor it to your specific needs. And the modern cloud architecture, MetricStream embarked on the journey of SaaSifying our products. So this modern cloud architecture will provide, from a security point of view, scalability, and more importantly, the ongoing updates to the product and platform that what we offer. All this put together that's what actually forms MetricStream as an integrated risk platform, which is simple and it is a purpose built for GRC specific needs. Go on to the next slide. Yeah. So we talked about federated data model, and Jason touched on how UCF actually just bring in and all the citations and then mapping the common controls to it. The federated data model is how it is actually implement the UCF as an example. So the beauty with this federated data model is it actually allows you to do many-to-many relationships. So you can have one control that mitigates multiple risks across different regulations or across different processes. It can actually just mitigate. It can actually tie to a policy, or it can actually get tied to a procedure. So there are a lot of combinations and permutations can be derived across your compliance program, and that's what the federated data model, which is a very powerful concept. And the way that is MetricStream addresses that is with the many-to-many relationship, which will allow you to map all your controls to the risks as well as to the regulations and citations and to the policies and procedures as well. So this will also actually just help you to simplify and save efforts that Jason talked about it from a UCF point of view. This federated data model is the core for the entire. If you can move on to the next slide. So the risk aligned with library elements, typically the controls are actually mapped to the risks and processes. And what we have observed and seeing as a trend in the recent years, it is also equally important the risks and the controls getting mapped to the policies and the procedures as well. If there are too many exceptions in the policy, whether it could be IT policy or it could be a financial policy or so on, those exceptions play an important role on how effective the control is. So tying back to the federated data model, so the important message here is it is not just actually associating the controls to the processes and the risk, it is also actually bringing that insight together, mapping it to the policies and procedures is a trend that what we are seeing. And the federated data model provides that ability for you to map intelligently across the landscape of the GRC processes and the policies and so on. Next slide. So this slide shows a graphical representation of the Data Explorer, which is a very unique and cool feature that's available within the MetricStream platform. What it does is you will be able to drill down from a control perspective, how many controls are there within your span for a given regulation, how many controls are there, how many assessments are done on the specific control, or how many issues are actually logged out of the control assessments. So you will be able to drill down in a graphical manner, in a graphical representation manner, and get a lot of insights about your GRC library landscape. So that's your compliance library, that's your risk library, and process procedures and policies and so on. So as you could see here, there are for ISO 2700, there are 185 controls that are mapped, and that's what you see here on this wheel. And then there are 3 assessments that are done for a specific control. And then there are 4 issues are logged around it, and there are 139 assets are mapped. You can click on any of it, and if you would like to see those 139 assets, you click on that box, and that will actually just bring this wheel with all the assets around it. Likewise, you can click on the issues and then get to see all the issues that are related. So this is a very powerful way of visualizing your entire GRC library, which right from the library definition, that is process, risk, and controls, into the assessments and the issues and so on. And on the next slide, if you So this is another representation where you get to see all the assessments that are actually done on this ISO 27001. So where there are 4 assessments, and then you get to see the 4 assessment drill down. So likewise, as I said, like you can click on issues and get to see issues. You can click on assets and so on. Next slide. So now we talked about platform and the core components of the platform, and we talked about the power of federated data model. And now in the context of IT compliance, which is quite relevant for our today's conversation, what are the core components of IT compliance and how it actually just works together within MetricStream? So libraries is one of the core components. So when we say library, we are talking about the controls, risks, and processes, procedures, citations, and so on. All those things put together is what library. That's an integral part of the IT compliance. And then once you have those libraries defined, your self-assessment and testing is another integral part of this IT compliance. And the service is also actually is part of it. And the GRC intelligence is where you it pull the feed like UCF into the IT compliance product. So that will help you to make those intelligent decisions. And the issues is the issues stemming out of the self-assessment and testing. So that's another module. And unified compliance framework, that's the key that what we are talking about here. So the integration with the unified UCF is also part of this. So all this put together actually bring the IT compliance to the bear, and it will give you all the flexibility and the freedom for you to manage your IT compliance program very effectively. And in addition to that, the reports and dashboards and all those things are in it. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah. So how does metrics? I mean, we talked about what are the core components of IT compliance. How does MetricStream IT compliance helps your organization? So one of the thing is we talked about libraries a lot, but as a continuous theme, it will help you to consolidate IT assets, IT asset classes, procedures and processes and so on. All these things are actually, it will help you to consolidate them. And more importantly, it will help you to actually give make a relationship across these things so that you you will be able to share controls across your citations, across your regulations and so on. So that is the power of that. And then it will help you to test controls with self-assessment, ongoing assessments and so on. And it will also help you to monitor InfoSec threat landscape via threat advisors and bulletins. This is a powerful feature in today's world, maintaining the threat landscape and assessing it. And the other one is as an outcome of your assessment, the findings is an important aspect. It will help you to actually track findings and also create action plans and bring them to closure that will eventually actually just help to further elevate the compliance program. And the references to the UCF and simplified stakeholder reporting. Now that you have all of this put together with the federated data model, with your control testing and issues, there is a lot of good reporting around. Sorry. Yeah, next slide, please. So as you could see visually here, this is the landing page of the compliance officer, and this can be actually tailored, configured to your specific needs. It will actually give you the broader visibility what's going on within your organization from a compliance point of view. As you could see, there are 378 critical assets for this use case that we're talking about. And then how many of them are actually tested, how many of them are actually not at plan. And then how many of them are open issues are there? There are 27 open issues, and the classification around those issues. And you also see a bar chart, and you can easily convert that into a pie chart. You can convert it into different charts as an end user too. So the compliance status by regulations and citations, you can see that critical assets by critical assets, And asset class, you can see how it is progressing, where the challenges are. So this is basically the dashboard that gives you the comprehensive view of your compliance program. And the beauty, as I said, is this can be configured to your specific needs. As an end user, you'll be able to do that. Next slide, please. So now the real part in terms of the UCF integration, which is today's topic. So how does MetricStream actually just bring this into the bear? Like how does MetricStream bring the UCF content into MetricStream platform? And this is where there is an integration that's a pre-built integration with UCF, where it will automatically bring the content, whether it is authoritative documents, which citations and mandates and so on, and controls and test procedures from UCF into the GRC library. That's the MetricStream library where all the controls, risks, and assets and asset classes are maintained. So this is a pre-built integration that comes along with the MetricStream IT compliance product, and it will automatically pull the updates from UCF coming into the GRC library, which will help you to further reduce your workload in terms of worrying about what has changed and how do I actually bring that into the system. Next slide. So the APIs and connectors, in addition to the UCF API, and in the context of the platform, I just briefly touched on this API connectors. The more and more in our experience, what we are seeing is the GRC is an important aspect where it should not only actually, it's not about one tool, it has to interact with several systems that sits across the organization. And MetricStream has a pre-built APIs with several of the systems, whether it could be CMDB integrations or whether it could be with your case and incident management systems or threat and vulnerability systems. Or it also has a framework, integration framework, which will easily enable you to integrate with any of the other systems, your homegrown systems or so on. So the important aspect is the landscape has changed, and the insight, whether it could be a compliance insight or your risk related data, it can come from any systems across the organization. And this API framework, the pre-built ones as well as the framework, it will enable to contact and talk to all these systems and bring that insight into your compliance program, which will help you to make risk informed decisions in an overall scheme of things. So that's what the power of MetricStream with the pre-built APIs and also the framework to build more and more APIs in an easy fashion. Next slide. So the configurability is the other aspect which we have touched on as part of the platform messaging. So the configurability, as I highlighted, the GRC needs are changing. While there is a lot of commonality across organizations, across programs, whether it could be a compliance program or it could be an audit program or a third-party management program within your organization, there are varied degree of the requirements or specific changes that needs to be facilitated for the tool to be for the compliance tool or for the GRC tool very effective, and if it has to actually survive and work for all the users. So the MetricStream has a very robust configurability features which will enable the IT admins or the end users in a lot of cases to configure your landing pages, which is nothing but the dashboards, or to configure your reports, or to actually just have additional attributes or do some workflow configurations. The system may be shipping with a two-level workflow from a control test point of view. But for your specific group, you may actually just want to live with just one-step workflow, or you may actually want to extend it to three-step workflow. So all these aspects are becoming very important and integral part of the compliance program. And the MetricStream tool provides this configurability, which will, on top of all the options that we ship as within the product, you will be able to do these configurations and be able to roll this out very elegantly to your end users. So that's the configurability aspect of it. And next slide, please. How does IT compliance help? Just to put some numbers behind it, and Jason talked about it, the cost saving of the UCF and overall. Like if you look at actually just having IT compliance along with the UCF, the power of it, our research as well as the analysis that we have done with our customer base, it has shown there is a 20 to 30% reduction in the in terms of the time spent in mapping, in actually just finding out the right controls for their particular regulations and citations and so on, as well as the time, actually a reduction in time with the assessments, because you do assessment at once and you will be able to reuse that. And also the 30% reduction in regulatory fines is another thing that what we have actually just found from the customers, because this is all standardized and it is easy to report it out, and it is also easy to show the evidence to the auditors and the regulators, and that's where the 30% reduction is coming into play. And it gives you the confidence in your program. It demonstrates maturity in front of the regulators, and it gain efficiencies with all the common things, and confidence in comprehensive compliance program, and drive improved business performance through this. Next slide. Yeah. So this is the use case that at the beginning of the session that Varun talked about it. As one of the world's leading cybersecurity companies, they have implemented our IT compliance and for their compliance program. When they came to us, these are the challenges that they listed out. They need to streamline and automate their risk and compliance program, and better understanding of their control failures across the organization. They have a siloed view, but they would like to actually understand across the organization and make risk informed decisions. In today's world, it is very important that we just don't mitigate, but we actually just fully aware of the risk, and then based on that make the right decisions, business decisions, by knowing the risks that we are getting into it. And the other challenge that they came to us is lack of visibility in terms of the compliance posture and the security aspects of it, and slow issue resolution overall, because it's spread across and there is no visibility on what's going on the other side of the equation. How does MetricStream actually just help, along with the UCF content, help solving this problem or overcome these challenges for this customer? After the implementation of the IT compliance along with the UCF, it has improved visibility across the organization, especially on the IT control side with the CMMC, SOC 2, and ISO, and PCI, and FedRAMP. It has improved visibility by 30% for those customers. And it also actually just helped them in defining the common controls across authoritative standards and the organization. So they were able to rationalize their controls. Earlier, it used to be actually close to 5,000 plus controls, and they were able to bring it down to 1,200 controls with all the standards and the sharing of those controls. And visibility of the control failures across the organization, that's another key benefit that they received out of it. And more importantly, efficiency with the evidence library mapping to the control. So what does this mean is the evidence library for them is sitting in the Jira. And now with the integration, we are able to actually just bring all those evidence insights into the MetricStream tool. Whenever the auditor is going through the audit, it's very easy to show all the evidences that are captured within the tool, and that actually just gave them the efficiency in the overall compliance program. And automated updates is the another key thing in this context. As I said, like the UCF integration that we have with within the tool, that will automatically pull any of the updates in the citations and so on. And that's easily made available and for the compliance officers. And 30% reduction in testing and compliance review time. And this is a big saver because there is a commonality. They were able to test the control at one place and be able to use it across the board. And also the evidence library integration. They don't need to actually just now go to a different tool and then show and find out what are the evidences that are captured as part of the control testing and so on. all this put together gave them a 30% reduction in the overall efficiencies. And just few facts about these customers. There are thousands of customers for this customer, and they are in 23 countries and so on. So next slide. Yeah. So MetricStream, and we mainly focused on the IT and cybersecurity, more towards the IT compliance side of it. But MetricStream has a comprehensive product suite. We have enterprise risk, operation risk in the risk landscape and business continuity. IT and cybersecurity, we talked about it, and audit and financial controls is another important thing, product pillar, along with regulatory compliance, third party, and frontline is an important key aspect that we've been actually observing it, because the frontline is in the front and center of a lot of this work on the GRC side. And the tool, MetricStream tool, is frontline enabled from a usability point of view, UX point of view, and the tools point of view. So these are all the product suites that what we offer. Next slide. And we are the largest independent GRC software providers. There are so many mergers and acquisitions with the other GRC providers, but we are still the largest independent GRC providers with 1,200 employees and the global partner ecosystem and 400 plus enterprise implementation experience, and ranked as a leader in several of the analyst reports. And that's about us. I think that's it. We are open for questions.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that insightful session, Ennis. I'm sure the audience would have enjoyed and then they would have got some insights for the today's session. So I think we are just a couple of minutes away, so I think we can take a couple questions. So there's one question for you, Jason. So I just want to kind of ask you. So there's a question from a gentleman saying that there has been a dramatic increase in the number of compliance and regulatory requirements for the IT functions in organizations. So with international IT regulations such as COSO, COBIT, ITIL, ISO 27000, and so on, and an evolving cyber security threat and landscape, to which regulations and organizational standards of conduct should a company should adhere, and also how do I know that which requirements should be we should be compliant with? So if you can take up that, please.
Yeah, so there's a couple things in there, right? The first one is, yeah, obviously there are there's lots of people now asking you to do stuff. So how do you know if you have to do it or not? Well, again, if it's something like a law or regulation, you have to do it, right? That's a mandatory compliance requirement. A lot of these other ones, you know, that you listed, like ISO 27001, great standard, you don't have to do it, right? Nobody's, you know, legislating that you must do it, but one of the things that really has started happening is expectations of your business partners. And so this is where a lot of those things that used to be voluntary, do it if you want to, are becoming a part of doing business, right? Because again, you might have a business partner that says, if I'm going to do business with you, you got to be ISO compliant, you got to be NIST compliant. Okay, at that point, you have to make the choice. Do I want to do the work, or do I say, nope, I'm not going to do it, and I'm just not going to have you as a client? You can say that. But most organizations are realizing that more and more of these things are things they do have to address, right? And so, but again, that's a decision your organization has to and should make. There should be a business decision behind it. Just because everybody else is doing it doesn't mean you should be doing it, right? Story my dad used to tell me all the time, right? If everybody else was jumping off the cliff, would you too? I don't know. Back then I might have, right? So that's kind of the first one. You know, how do you know which requirements you need to be compliant with? That's some of what we talked about to begin with. You can choose to download all those documents, go through, try to read everything, figure it out. It's going to take you months for each one of those documents to do it, or you can use something like the UCF tool and very quickly start to understand what it is that you have to comply with.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Jason, for that. I think we are already on top of the hour. So just before we conclude, audience, I have one more last poll question for you guys to answer. So please answer that poll question, so that we would just want to know how can you help, how can we be your partner, or how can we help you in your IT compliance journey. So if you want, we can schedule a deep dive demo of a solution, or anything related to product, case study or use case. We can send it that across to you as well. So please answer that poll. I think our team would get back to you immediately on whichever option that you have choose, and we will help you to on your IT compliance journey. So yeah, so I think that's good. Okay, all right. So it was a wonderful session. So thank you, Jason and Enes, for this very insightful sessions. I'm sure the audience have taken some insights of today's session. So any questions, any further questions you guys have, please drop it in the chat box, or you can mail it across to our email ID, which is flashing in your screen right now, which is webinar@metricstream.com. So you can send in your questions to that ID. We will answer that individually, offline. So with that, I would take a note for you again to thank you, both the speakers and the audience, for joining today's session. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day ahead. I think keep safe, be safe, and be healthy on wherever you are. So thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thanks, thanks everyone. Thanks.